It's hard to believe that anyone could predict the future, but there are many ancient prophecies that came true. In this video, we'll look at some of the most amazing predictions from around the world and throughout history and find out just how accurate they really were. The Babylonians were astronomers and mathematicians, but they also used their knowledge of the stars to make predictions about the weather and even the outcome of battles. They kept careful records of the positions of the planets and other celestial objects and then used these records to develop complex systems of astrology. For example, the Babylonians believed that the planet Mars ruled over war and violence, so if Mars was in a certain position in the sky, they might predict that there would be a battle soon. Similarly, they believed that the planet Jupiter ruled over prosperity and good fortune, so if Jupiter was in a certain position in the sky, they might predict that there would be an economic boom. Now, while it's fun to think about what the Babylonians might have predicted about the future, it's important to remember that much of what we think of as astrology is actually just superstition. There's no real scientific basis for believing that the positions of the planets can affect our lives here on Earth. But the Babylonians weren't the only ones who tried to predict the future based on the positions of the planets. The Oracle of Delphi was a priestess in the Greek city of Delphi, who was said to be able to predict the future. She became famous throughout the ancient world for her cryptic and often ambiguous prophecies. Some of her most famous prophecies were about politics and war. For example, she is said to have warned the Spartans not to go to war with the Thebans, but they didn't listen and they ended up losing. She also warned the Athenians not to trust the Argives, and they lost as well. However, sometimes the Oracle of Delphi's prophecies were more positive. She is said to have encouraged the Corinthians to build a temple to Apollo after a devastating earthquake, and they did, and it became one of the most important temples in Greece. Whether or not the Oracle of Delphi was actually able to see into the future is debatable, but there's no denying that her prophecies had a major impact on the course of history. The Mayans were a highly advanced civilization that lived in what is now Mexico, in Central America. They are best known for their impressive architecture and their mysterious writing system. But the Mayans were also interested in astronomy, and they developed a sophisticated calendar system that allowed them to keep track of time with incredible accuracy. One of the most famous Mayan prophecies has to do with their calendar. According to the Mayan calendar, there were 260 days in a year, and every 52 years, the calendar would repeat itself. This led some people to believe that the Mayans believed that the world would end every 52 years. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, they found that the Mayans were using a different calendar for religious purposes. This calendar had 260 days and was used for divination and making predictions about the future. The Spanish were very interested in this calendar and they took it back to Europe, where it became known as the Mayan Doomsday Prophecy. However, the Mayan prophecy was actually much more complicated than the Spanish realized. The Mayans didn't believe that the world would end every 52 years. Instead, they believed that each cycle of 52 years represented a new beginning, a time to start over and make new predictions. The Mayans were very interested in the future, and they used their calendar and their knowledge of astronomy to try to predict what would happen next. While some of their predictions may have come true, others were less accurate. But regardless, the Mayans were some of the first people to attempt to predict the future on a regular basis. Nostradamus was a French astrologer and physician who is best known for his book Les Prophecies, which contains a collection of his predictions about the future. Nostradamus wrote in a style that is intentionally vague and ambiguous, which has led to a lot of debate about whether or not he was actually predicting the future. Some of his most famous predictions include the Great Fire of London in 1666, the French Revolution in 1789, and the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. But there is no evidence that Nostradamus predicted any of these events. In fact, historians have been able to show that many of his predictions were actually made long after the events he supposedly predicted had already happened. For example, Nostradamus supposedly predicted the Great Fire of London, but he wrote his book, Les Prophecies, in 1655, long before the fire actually occurred. It's possible that Nostradamus was simply repeating information that was already circulating in London at the time. And the same is probably true of his prediction of the French Revolution. Nostradamus wrote Les Prophecies in 1666, and it's possible that he was simply repeating rumors that were already circulating in France at the time. Rise of Napoleon Bonaparte is another story. Nostradamus supposedly predicted the rise of Napoleon in one of his quatrains, but this prediction was actually made long after Napoleon had already seized power in France. So it's clear that Nostradamus' predictions are not as accurate as they may seem. But that doesn't mean that he was completely wrong. Some of his predictions have come true, but it's hard to say whether this is because he really did have the ability to see into the future, or because he was simply a very good guesser. The Romans were a superstitious people, and they believed that the future could be predicted by studying the behavior of birds and the flight paths of airplanes. One of the most important methods of divination among the Romans was the practice of haruspication, which involved examining the entrails of sacrificed animals. But perhaps the most famous Roman seers were the augurs, who specialized in predicting the future by observing the flight paths of birds. Augurs would watch the birds flying overhead and then interpret their movements as signs from the gods. If the birds were flying high and their flight was smooth and effortless, it was seen as a good omen. But if the birds were flying low or if they made erratic movements, it was seen as a bad omen. The augurs also kept careful records of their observations and would consult these records when making predictions about the future. The Romans believed that the augurs were so skilled at predicting the future that they could even tell the fate of individual people. And one of the most famous predictions ever made by a Roman augur was the prediction about the fate of Julius Caesar. According to legend, Caesar was warned by an augur that he would be assassinated on the Ides of March, but he ignored the warning and was killed. Whether or not the augur really did warn Caesar about his assassination is debatable, but the story has become one of the most famous examples of a failed prediction in history. The Hopi are an indigenous people of North America who live in the southwestern United States. They are known for their beautiful pottery, their unique language, and their rich culture. But perhaps the Hopi are best known for their prophecies about the future of humanity. According to Hopi tradition, the world has gone through several ages, each of which has been marked by great changes and challenges. The Hopi believe that we are currently living in the fourth age, which is the age of purification. This is a time of great upheaval and change, but it is also a time of great opportunity. The Hopi believe that at the end of this age, there will be a great awakening and humanity will enter the fifth age, which is the age of harmony. This will be a time of peace and balance, when all people will live together in harmony with nature. The Hopi have been sharing their prophecies with the world for many years, and their message is one of hope and encouragement. They believe that the future of humanity is in our hands and that we have the power to create a better world. Their prophecies are not meant to scare us, but rather to inspire us to take action and to work towards a better future. According to legend, Mother Shipton was a 15th century Englishwoman who had strange visions of the future. One of her most famous prophecies was about the Great Fire of London in 1666. She supposedly predicted that the fire would start near a bakery and destroy 5 or 6 of the city's main streets. While it's hard to say exactly where the fire started, it's clear that Mother Shipton's prediction was remarkably accurate. Another one of Mother Shipton's prophecies was about the discovery of America in 1492. She supposedly said, "Men shall ride on curling ships across a huge and mighty main, to lands unknown to most, where many men have gone and never returned." While this prophecy is not as specific as some of the others, it's still remarkably accurate considering that it was made over 100 years before America was discovered. Mother Shipton's prophecies were written down by a friend of hers, and they were published in a book in 1524. The book was titled, The Prophecies and Revelations of Mother Shipton, and it quickly became a bestseller in England. The Egyptians were a highly advanced civilization that lived in what is now Egypt. They are best known for their impressive pyramids and their mysterious hieroglyphics. But the Egyptians were also very interested in astronomy, and they kept careful records of the positions of the planets and other celestial objects. These records were kept in what is now known as Egyptian star charts. The Egyptians used their star charts to make predictions about the future. They believed that the positions of the planets could affect the outcome of battles and the success of crops. For example, the Egyptians believed that if Mars was in a certain position in the sky, it was a good omen for war. Similarly, they believed that if Venus was in a certain position in the sky, it was a good omen for the harvest. While we now know that there is no scientific basis for these beliefs, the Egyptians were remarkably accurate in their predictions. This is because they were simply recording what was happening in the sky and then using that information to make educated guesses about the future. They weren't trying to interpret the will of the gods or anything like that. They were simply using logic and reason to make the best predictions they could. The Hindus believe that the world goes through cycles of creation and destruction. Each cycle lasts for 4,3,200,000 years. During this time, the world is said to go through 4 ages, each of which is characterized by a particular set of qualities. The first age is called Satya Yuga, and it is characterized by great wisdom and virtue. The second age is called Treta Yuga, and it is characterized by great strength and power. The third age is called Dvapara Yuga, and it is characterized by great wealth and luxury. The fourth and final age is called Kali Yuga, and it is characterized by great sin and suffering. Kali Yuga is also the age in which we are currently living. According to Hindu mythology, during Kali Yuga, evil will prevail over good, and the world will eventually be destroyed. But after a period of destruction, the world will be created again, and the cycle will begin anew. In recent years, some Hindus have interpreted their own prophecies in a more technological way. For example, some believe that the 4 ages actually refer to 4 different stages in the evolution of human consciousness. The first 3 ages represent the development of the physical world, while the 4th age represents the development of the spiritual world. Some also believe that the end of the world prophecy is actually a metaphor for the end of ignorance. As we move into the Kali Yuga, we are moving closer and closer to enlightenment. The ancient Chinese kept detailed records of the sky and used their observations to make predictions about the future. They believed that the positions of the planets and other celestial objects could affect the outcome of battles, the success of crops, and even the fate of dynasties. For example, the Chinese believed that if Mars was in a certain position in the sky, it was a good omen for war. Similarly, they believed that if Venus was in a certain position in the sky, it was a good omen for the harvest. They also kept detailed records of comets and other celestial events and used these records to make predictions about the future. For example, the Chinese believed that the appearance of a comet was a bad omen, and they often used this as a justification for going to war. The Chinese were remarkably accurate in their predictions, because they were simply recording what was happening in the sky and then using that information to make educated guesses about the future. They weren't trying to interpret the will of the gods or anything like that. They were simply using logic and reason to make the best predictions they could. Saint Malachi was a 12th century Irish monk who is best known for his book, The Prophecy of the Popes. The book contains a list of predictions about the popes who would serve in the Catholic Church from the time of Pope Innocent III until the Pope who would bring about the end of the world. The predictions are remarkably accurate, and many believe that Saint Malachi had the gift of prophecy. In fact, the book has been so accurate that it has led to a lot of speculation about what Saint Malachi might have predicted about the future of the Church. Some believe that Saint Malachi predicted the Reformation, while others believe that he predicted the French Revolution. It's hard to say what Saint Malachi really meant, but his prophecies are definitely worth taking seriously. The Book of Revelation is one of the most mysterious and controversial books in the Bible. It is full of apocalyptic imagery and predictions about the end of times. Some of the most famous predictions made in the Book of Revelation include the Great Tribulation, the return of Jesus Christ, and the destruction of the world. While many Christians believe that the Book of Revelation is literally true, others believe that it is a metaphor for the struggles that Christians face in this world. Regardless of how you interpret the Book of Revelation, it is clear that it has had a profound impact on Western civilization. The book has inspired countless works of art, music, and literature, and it has also been used to justify a lot of violence and persecution. The I Ching is an ancient Chinese text that is used for divination and fortune-telling. It is one of the oldest surviving books of Chinese literature, and it is believed to have been written over 3,000 years ago. The I Ching, or Book of Changes, is based on the belief that the universe is constantly changing, and that these changes can be predicted by examining the patterns in nature. The I Ching contains 64 hexagrams, each of which represents a different combination of yin and yang lines. Each hexagram is associated with a particular meaning and can be used to provide guidance or insight into a particular situation. To use the I Ching, a person would first need to ask a question and then cast a set of 50 euro stocks or coins. The number of heads or tails would then determine the hexagram that applied to the question. The I Ching has been used for centuries to make predictions about the future, and it remains popular in China today. Medieval seers were people who lived in Europe during the Middle Ages and claimed to have the ability to see into the future. They made predictions about everything from the weather to the fate of nations. Some of their predictions came true, while others were less accurate. But regardless of how accurate their predictions were, medieval seers played an important role in shaping people's beliefs about the future. Many people turned to seers for guidance in times of uncertainty or when faced with difficult decisions. Seers were especially popular during times of plague and war, when people were already fearful of the future. Medieval seers were often accused of being witches or heretics, and they were sometimes persecuted for their beliefs. But despite the danger, people continued to seek out their predictions and advice. That's a wrap for today's topic. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with your fellow fact seekers. Your support means the world to us.